Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, Steve Piper here with CyberEdge Group. Thanks so much for joining our webinar and to learn about the results of the 2018 Cyberthreat Defense Report, sponsored in part by Great Bay Software. We're very pleased to have Great Bay join us as a sponsor this year as a platinum sponsor. And if you stick around to the end of this webinar, I'm going to tell you how to download the full report and to also access an executive brief and an infographic on Great Bay's website. So why don't we dive in? And first, I want to set a little bit of context here. Many of you are not familiar with this report. I just want to tell you about this report and how it differs from other reports out there. So this is a vendor-agnostic survey. Certainly, we have sponsors like Great Bay, to help fund this report. But this is a vendor-agnostic survey conducted in November of 2017. 27 questions, and we have a total of 1,200. Security decision makers and practitioners, and they're employed by organizations with 500 plus employees. Okay, so these are small to medium-sized enterprises, and then full-blown multinational enterprises, and then everything kind of in between. But no vendor names are referenced in this report. So unlike reports that you'll see out there offered by vendors, this one is specifically vendor agnostic. So this survey is designed to assess a few different things: an organization's security posture, perceptions of cyber threats and IT security challenges, and the overall health of IT security budgets, among other things that you're going to find in the report. We're not going to have time to cover everything in this webinar today, but again, I'm going to tell you where you can download the report so that you can learn about all of the findings of this year's survey. So in terms of demographics, I already mentioned that there's 1,200 respondents, but they're actually from 17 different countries across North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. So this is very much a global cybersecurity study, and 19 different industries. We're going to talk about some of the more significant industries in the survey, but it's definitely spans the gamut across large organizations and smaller organizations. The pie chart on the left obviously is the breakdown by countries, the largest slice being the United States, roughly almost 30% of the respondents from the US. But on the right-hand side, this is organizational count. So 500 to 999 employees, and then 1,000 to 5,000, and so on. So it's a really nice spectrum. And we have no more than 15% of the respondents from any single industry. So it's a very well-balanced survey. So let's jump in. And really what I want you to accomplish here is I want you to think about the results, think about how you might answer some of these survey questions, and think about how your organization stacks up against the global results, and then occasionally by organization size and by industry. So let's start off by talking about trends related to current security postures. Now, I'm a glasses half full kind of guy. I'm an optimistic person, and so I wanted to start this year with something positive, because in prior years, this is our 5th annual Cyberthreat Defense Report, and we've had a lot of bad news over the years, but we have a couple pieces of good news that I really want to bring out this year, and this is one of those 2 items. We ask, and in the next question, you're going to see specifically, which respondents work for organizations that were adversely affected by a successful cyber attack. Okay, and we're going to look at the specific breakdown in the next slide. But big picture here, 77% of organizations experienced a successful cyber attack in 2017. Okay, so this is a result from our 2018 report. So it sort of sounds like bad news, but if you look at the last 4 years, it's been ticking up year after year from 62% to almost 71%. To almost 76% to 79%. This is the first time that we've seen a little bit of a downward trend in terms of the percentage of organizations affected by successful cyber attacks. So listen, I'm a cybersecurity guy, so I'm gonna take whatever good news that I can get. So this is our ray of hope. There's gonna be one more ray of hope that I'm gonna share later in the presentation. Now, getting more specific, the specific question we asked is, how many times do you estimate that your organization's global network has been compromised by a successful cyber attack within the past 12 months? Now, I did mention up front that we had 1,200 security professionals respond to this survey. They were all qualified respondents, 500 plus employees. When you look at the survey questions, you're going to see the sample size vary just a little bit. The reason is any good survey should have a response that says, don't know. In other words, if the respondent doesn't know the answer, we don't want them to guess. We want them to, skip that question and just say, I don't know, and move on. So 1,136 people responded to this question. And as I mentioned before, 77.2% said that they weren't affected. That's the inverse of 22.8. So on the chart on the left-hand side, the choices were not once, between 1 and 5 times, between 6 and 10 times, more than 10. And the light blue shading is for this year's report. Okay, so the inverse of not once being 22.8 is 77.2, experiencing 1 or more successful attacks. Now, a small little ray of hope here, another little twist on the same stat. The frequency of higher volume attacks is also declining a little bit. So if you look in the chart on the left, between 6 and 10 times, that dropped a little bit from 22.2% to 18.4. So between 6 and 10. And then 10 plus, that dropped from 10.7 to 9%. So this is good news. I mean, it's a sign that maybe the bleeding has finally stopped. It's not a trend yet because this is just 1 year that we've seen this decline, but I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, and hopefully we're starting a trend that we're going to see next year. Now, on the right side, we break it down by countries. In other words, what countries have been affected, or the respondents from these countries have been affected by 1 or more successful cyber attacks in the preceding year. China, top of the list. Now, we think of China as a nation-state threat actor, hacking into the U.S. government and government contractors and so on and so forth, but they're also highly targeted. And so they experience a lot of different attacks, followed by Japan, Turkey, Spain. Down at the bottom, if you live in Italy, well, that's a great place to live as a security professional because you're far less likely to be victimized by a cyber attack. 46% of Italian respondents said that they were victimized. So good news for Italy. Another question we asked, which is sort of complementary to the first one, first question is, have you been successfully attacked? This one asks, what is the likelihood that your organization's network will become compromised by a successful attack in 2018? So another way of looking at this is, how optimistic or pessimistic are you for the coming year? So the overall results are pretty similar to last year. When you add up somewhat likely and very likely together, that comes up to 62%. So roughly 6 and 10 security professionals feels that it's more likely than not that there is going to be a successful attack in the coming year. And that's unfortunately ticked up year after year. It's gotten a little bit worse. In fact, when we first started the report, I believe it was something like 2 out of 5 respondents felt an attack was more likely. Now it's ticked up to 3 out of 5. On the right side, this is the breakdown by country. And the respondents from these countries feeling that a successful attack is more likely than not. China, again, at the top of the list, which makes a lot of sense because they're the most victimized by country. And then Italy, bottom of the list, which makes sense because they're the least victimized. Next question we ask, this is kind of interesting. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being highest, rate your organization's overall security posture, meaning its ability to defend against cyber threats, in each of the following IT components. So think of these as building blocks of your company's network, different categories of assets. And down at the bottom in red, we have a tie this year. Last year, mobile devices were the weakest link. This year, it's mobile devices and application containers, like Docker, for example. So that's Those are the IT infrastructure components that security professionals feel are the most difficult to secure, followed by cloud infrastructure, laptops and assets in your DMZ. Things that are static, like servers and data stores, those are obviously more, they're easier to secure because they're not going anywhere, they're static IPs. You know, we understand those configurations. They're not things that are changing constantly like containers and mobile devices. Next question, on a scale of 1 to 5, you're going to see a lot of these 1 to 5 questions, with 5 being highest. Rate the adequacy of your organization's capability. We're talking people and processes here in each of the following functional areas of IT security. So in other words, what IT security functions are the most challenging? So the least challenging is identity and access management. So that's the good news. User security awareness and training them. You know, it's interesting that it seems easy to do, okay, but I question whether we're doing it frequently enough. And remember that because that's going to come up later in our presentation. Then security engineering, architecture, and design, not quite as challenging. Bottom of the list here in red, application development and testing is very challenging to secure that environment. And here, attack surface reduction. And honestly, this starts with seeing. If you can't see what's on your network, if you don't know what's there, especially, you know, Internet of Things, for example, well, then how can you reduce your attack surface? You know, so that's part of you know, reducing your network's attack surface. So identifying assets, you know, understanding their vulnerabilities, security configurations, and then sort of patching them, maybe pen testing this. All of these activities relate to attack surface reduction. Big challenge, as you can imagine, for organizations these days. So we've heard in recent years how challenging it is for organizations to hire you know, qualified security talent and to retain them. Well, we asked, this is a brand new question in this year's survey, well, which areas are you experiencing a shortfall? So select the roles or areas for which your organization is currently experiencing a shortfall of skilled IT security personnel. In red, you know, red is typically bad in our you know, in our figures here. IT security administrator, that is the most challenging IT security job role to recruit for and to retain. So administrators that are administering your system, not the day-to-day users, you know, the IT security analysts, although that's in second place. Least difficult to hire, IT security or compliance auditor, okay? So this is the percentage. So 1 in 3 organizations has a skills shortage for IT security administrators, and then 1 in 5 for IT security compliance auditors. So which industries are affected by IT security shortfalls in particular? So I mentioned that there's 19 different industries that we covered in our survey, but the top 7 here, education, telecom, manufacturing, finance, government, healthcare, and retail, these are in descending order the organizations that are adversely affected by that IT security skills shortage. Education, top of the list, followed by telecom and technology. Okay, so that's the first of 3 areas that we're going to talk about in our webinar today. You know, the first one being you know, related to your organization's security posture. The second area is perceptions and concerns, and this spans several areas. So let's just jump in. So this is a question we ask every year about cyber threats. I mean, this is our Cyberthreat Defense Report. So obviously we're going to survey our respondents about their perceptions of different categories of cyber threats. Scale of 1 to 5, 5 being highest, rate your overall concern for each of the following types of cyber threats targeting your organization. And here we had a lot of opinions. Out of the 1,200 respondents, only 4 opted out because they didn't feel like they had a handle on it. So 1,196. Malware, top of the list year after year. So it seems like it's going to be there, not going away. And second place this year, ransomware. We're going to talk more about ransomware. Ransomware is still very much in the headlines, and one of the biggest headlines from our report is the adverse effects from responding to ransomware. So I'm going to get into that in just a minute. So ransomware in second place, phishing, spear phishing. Spear phishing is, obviously a very common tactic for initiating advanced targeted attacks, advanced persistent threats. That's in the third position. And then account takeovers, credential abuse attacks. We're not as worried down at the bottom by drive-by downloads and watering hole attacks. These are where websites are infected. And then a watering hole attack is a little bit more targeted, sort of semi-targeted, where you're infecting a website that you expect companies that you might like to target to visit. I remember Microsoft was adversely affected by a watering hole attack a few years ago, followed by insider threats and then these advanced persistent threats. But malware, ransomware, top of the heap. So at the start of this webinar, I mentioned there were two rays of hope. The first one is the first ever decline in the percentage of organizations affected by successful attacks. This one is overall concern for cyber threats. So I'm going to go back one slide just for a moment here. And again, this was a 1 to 5 question here. Rate your overall concern for these different types of cyber threats. So it ranges from 3.82 for malware to 3.52 for drive-by downloads. The average this year, 3.66. Now, in preceding years, we calculated the averages, and we created this thing called a threat concern index. So in other words, how strong of a headache are these cyber threats causing security professionals like you? And so it's ticked up year after year. In 2014, the average rating was 3.1, and then the next year, 3.26. Then a big jump in 2016 to 3.71, little jump in 2017. So this is our first ever decline in our threat concern index. So, now that we're seeing fewer cyber attacks, first ever drop in successful attacks in the preceding 12 months, then, this is also, another sign that we're still vigilant, still very concerned, but it's trending in the right direction. So hopefully what we're doing is right. We're making the right investments. Certainly there's innovative technologies that are now on the market to help you discover assets, to help you maintain compliance with these assets, to reduce the surface, the attack surface, and all these great things. So this is another positive sign, another ray of hope. So I mentioned I was going to dive a little bit deeper into ransomware, and here we are. I've got a couple slides specifically to talk about ransomware. This first stat isn't visualized here, but we did ask, were you affected by ransomware? In other words, if victimized by ransomware in the past 12 months, did your organization pay a ransom using Bitcoin or another anonymous currency to recover data? Now, one of the options was we were not affected by ransomware in the preceding 12 months. Okay, so what we did is we backed those responses out. 45% were not affected by successful ransomware attacks. Okay, it doesn't mean that they weren't attempted. It means that the ransomware malware was not successfully embedded. So 45% of organizations were not successfully attacked by ransomware, but a little more than half, 55% of organizations were. Now let's look at this donut chart here, and there's 4 different slices here. On the left, we have 8% saying no, we weren't affected, we asked if you were victimized by ransomware, and if so, did you pay the ransom? No, so these are all victims. Okay, so all 4 wedges here are victims of ransomware, but the 4 outcomes, starting with 8%, no, we didn't pay the ransom, and we lost our data. Okay, so they stood their ground. They said, no, we're not going to pay this ransom. We have no guarantee we're going to get our data back. Plus, we don't want to fund, cyber criminals. So no, we're going to bite the bullet, and we lost our data. So that's 8%. And then the 53.3% was, no, we didn't pay the ransom, but we recovered our data. So that's great news. So just over half of the ransomware victims didn't pay the ransom and got their data back. So their data may be encrypted, where if you pay the ransom, they'll unencrypt your data and then get your data back. But these people presumably had backups. And I want to underscore that. Not only the importance of backup in the workplace, make sure that mobile devices and desktops, everything's backed up. but also in your personal lives, because you personally may be victimized by ransomware. So having a good offline backup, preferably even in the cloud, that's a great ransomware killer, because then you can re-image your disk and then restore all your data. You haven't lost anything. Because the inverse is you pay the ransom, okay, which buying Bitcoin isn't easy by itself, but if you figure out how to buy Bitcoin and then you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee you're going to get your data back. So looking at that reddish colored wedge, that's the worst situation here. Yes, you paid the ransom. No, actually, it's not the worst. The worst would be you paid the ransom, but you lost your data. So the 19.1% is you paid the ransom, but you recovered your data. Okay, so bad news, you lost money. Good news, you got your data back. The worst case scenario here is the 19.6%. Yes, we paid the ransom, but we lost our data. How disheartening would that be? That you go through the trouble of paying the ransom and then you don't get your data back. Okay, so overall, 39% of victims paid the ransom, but only half of those people got their data back. So an analogy here is it's kind of like flipping a coin. So you flip the coin once to see if you're likely to be, if your organization is likely to be victimized by ransomware. Okay, so flip it, 55% likely. So a little bit more likely than not. But it's kind of like flipping a coin. And then if you are victimized and you pay the ransom, well, flip it again to see if you're going to get that data back. Because half of the ransomware victims that paid the ransom did not get their data back. So that's really scary stuff. This is my favorite question, and we ask this each year on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being highest. Rate how each of the following inhibit your organization from adequately defending itself against cyber threats. So in other words, what's standing in the way? What's keeping you up at night? What's standing in the way to success? For being able to mitigate cyber threats better. So the last 4 years, the same answer was given. This year, we have a new first place reason. The last 4 years, low security awareness among employees. Now, here's what's interesting. Lack of skilled personnel, you can see 1 this year. We're talking 100th of a point. So really, think of it as a 3-way tie. Lack of skilled personnel, low security awareness among employees, too much data to analyze. These are the big 3 things that are standing in the way of succeeding. But here's what's interesting. Lack of skilled personnel, which technically is in first place this year. In the first year we did the survey, it was in 5th place. Then the next year, 4th place. Next year, 3rd place. Next year, 2nd place. And now 1st place. So in other words, this is a problem that has been growing year after year, and now it's a reality where organizations are just suffering from recruiting IT security talent and retaining that talent. So that is really what's standing in the way. And again, low security awareness, too much data to analyze, very close 2nd place. Frustrations are rising. So here's another index. We talked about that threat concern index about cyber threats, and that was some little bit of good news that the overall concern for cyber threats dropped for the very first time. So what we did here, and I'm going to go back 1 slide, just like I did before. We have 1 to 5 ratings. So lack of skilled personnel is a 3.25. Too many false positives. Okay, so that's a least concern. It's a 3.08. So kind of a tight grouping here. But the average is 3.18, as opposed to last year, 3.07. Year before that, 3.03. Then 2.69, 2.58. So in other words, think of the security concern index. Gosh, think of it as the mentality or the satisfaction of security professionals, or frustrations, maybe is a better way of saying it. Frustrations are rising. So these obstacles, not being able to find and retain security talent, low security awareness among employees, and then other things, like lack of security budget. That's not as big of a concern, and we're going to see why shortly. But that's also can be a concern. And too many false positives. So overall, frustrations do seem to be rising a little bit among security professionals. So that's the second of the 3 areas that we're talking about today. So your organization's security posture, and then perceptions from cybersecurity professionals. The third area is current and future investments. And we're going to talk about a couple of topics here. There's several more topics if you download the full report, and I'm going to tell you how to do that in just a couple minutes. But the first of two areas is security slice of the IT budget pie. Now, in prior years, we asked respondents, what range of budget are you? And we're talking about people and security technologies, everything, sort of all in, of anything that relates to IT security. What percentage of the overall IT budget is consumed by security? I remember 10, 12 years ago, Gartner, analyst research firm, did a press release, and it was like 5% globally. So in other words, 5% of a typical IT budget was allocated to security. Fast forward a decade, we're now looking at 12%. So what we changed this year is, instead of doing a range like 1 to 4 or 5 to 8, something like that, we had the user do a drop down, and then they could give a specific percentage. So this year we're able to calculate a mean, an average, and we were able to do that by country, by industry, and by employee count, by organization size. So globally, across all three of these things, 12%. Okay, so typical IT, enterprise IT budget, about 12% is allocated to security. So think about how that compares in your organization, but also think about it, how it compares by country. So Mexico seems to spend the most on security as a percentage of the overall IT budget at 15.6%. The inverse, Japan, the least amount of the IT budget goes to security. For those of you based in the US, about 13%, 12.8%, so just a little bit more than the mean. By industry, pretty tight grouping here from 11.6 to 13%. Telecom and technology, top of the heap, followed by healthcare and finance. Now, here's what's interesting. By employees count, okay, so think of this as organization size. The more employees, the bigger your company. So if you're a smaller organization, 500 to 999 employees, it's about 11.1% of the overall IT budget is allocated to security. And then it ticks up between 1,000 and 5,000 employees, ticks up a little. 5,000 to 10,000, 10 to 25,000, more than 25,000, it progressively ticks up. So the larger the organization, you're not only spending more dollars on IT security just because you're big, but the slice of the IT budget pie that you're consuming with security also ticks up for larger organizations. So I thought that was interesting. And then the second area relating to IT security budgets is, we asked, are your IT security budgets falling or rising? And again, we enabled the respondents to select a specific option, not a range, but the exact percentage that their IT budget is decreasing or increasing. The mean globally, 4.7%. So IT security budgets are rising by an average of 4.7% in 2018 over 2017. So think about that for your organization, but compare it by country. At the top of the list, China and South Africa are actually South Africa 5.6%, China 5.5%, then it falls from there. US 5.1%. So again, a little bit above that mean. Bottom of the list, Canada, 3.6%. IT security budgets in Canada are rising by an average of 3.6%. Okay, but really, IT security budgets across the board are rising. They're definitely not falling. By industry, telecom, top list at 5.5%, then education, retail, government. And if you're based in the U.S., I think we have a sense of this, that our federal government is not spending as much as we would like on cybersecurity. We've seen a lot of the ramifications from that, but government budgets are rising the least. But at least they're still rising by an average of 4%. And let's be clear, this government is not just U.S. federal government. This is governments, federal governments from around the world, not just U.S. But here's what's also interesting. So we talked about, as the employee count rises, you're consuming a bigger slice of the IT budget pie. Well, your IT security budgets are more likely to rise if you work for a larger organization. So again, 500 to 1,000 employees, or 999 if you want to get specific, 4.1%. All the way up to if you have more than 25,000 employees, your IT security budget is likely to rise by 5.2%. So again, with all of these things, all of these perceptions, your ability to minimize your attack surface and improve your overall security posture. Think about, and the health of your security budget. Think about these things in the context of global responses and also by industry, country, and organization size. So key takeaways. So we still have lots of challenges here. Challenges facing healthcare, finance, manufacturing, and certainly other key industries. We still have lots of challenges reducing our attack surfaces so that we can make these cyber threats a moot point. If we can see our assets and if we can mitigate the vulnerabilities and security misconfigurations in those assets, and we can improve our security posture, then we're reducing our attack surface. And that's the next bullet, challenge about mitigating risks of malware and ransomware. Certainly it's important to invest in technologies, to detect cyber threats, prevent them, cyber threat hunting. These are all great things, but don't forget the core need to be able to identify the assets on your network and help reduce their attack surfaces, especially in an environment where we have this IT security skills shortage. We need to find ways to work smarter, not harder. And that's the segue to the third key challenge here is hiring and retaining qualified IT security personnel. This is a challenge that has been growing year after year, but there is hope. We've seen our first ever decline in successful cyber attacks, our first ever decline in overall concern for cyber threats. So hopefully things are starting to get better. Please join us for next year's Cyber Threat Defense Report, and we'll continue the story to see if we're actually going to see some trends here. And then of course the healthy increase of IT security budgets across all countries, all industries, and all company sizes. So some things to be positive about in 2018. Now up front, I mentioned I would tell you how to download the full report. And again, we do want to thank our platinum sponsor, Great Bay Software, for their contributions to this year's report. So connect to pages.greatbaysoftware.com/CDR for Cyber Threat Defense Report. There you can register to download the full report. Or if you connect to the Great Bay Software website, and you click on resources and towards the top of the screen, or if you want to connect directly, greatbaysoftware.com/resources, you can download the 2018 Cyber Threat Defense Report Executive Brief and also an infographic just to get a lot of the key results. And of course, connect to greatbaysoftware.com to learn about their different cybersecurity solutions. And again, we do want to thank them for being a platinum sponsor of this year's report. So with that, I'm going to bring it to a close. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, learning about the results, and hopefully you can join us again next year as we continue the story for the 2019 Cyber Threat Defense Report. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.